gamers, we're gonna go ahead and review the 2019 13-inch MacBook Pro. This is going to be almost identical to the 2018 model. Actually, they haven't really changed anything. It's the same video card, the Intel Iris Plus graphics 655. That's the same from the 2018 and 2019. The only thing that actually changed on the base model is actually the CPU. The CPU actually got upgraded from the 2.2 gigahertz to the 2.4 gigahertz. The 2018 goes turbo boost to 3.8, the 2019 turbo boost to 4.1. Is it significant enough for you to notice? Probably not. Is it worth the money? Not really. The main advantage of actually going with the MacBook 2019 is actually, I believe this is the 5th iteration of the keyboard, which is fixed now, all the issue of the dust and malfunctions that happen. They changed the membrane now to a nylon type, which has a very smoother touch, but more than that, it actually reduces chances of dust and so on. So hopefully it will last you longer, but they did add the 2019 and the replacement program. So if your keyboard does fail, the 2019 is actually still covered for I'm not sure how long of a period of time. I think it was 6 years, but we can find out afterwards. So we're gonna go ahead and test a few of the games. I have some Blizzard games to test on the Windows version, as well as I have Boot Camp installed, and we're gonna test some games on Windows, as well as Overwatch, Destiny, and other games, and we'll see how well they perform. But my guess, it's not going to perform more than a couple of frames per second higher than the 2018 model. But let's go ahead and start with World of Warcraft.
It's not ready yet.
So, at the moment, I think I have it set at what I discovered would be the optimal state to play, which is at the graphics setting 5, as you can see here. But I'm going to show you how bad it gets if you're going to a higher setting. Now again, you can play around with some of the effects here to see if you can get tweaking it a little bit higher, but I'm just going to give you an idea. Look how choppy it is. And you're doing about 30, 42 frames per second, and there's barely any action, but it's a noticeable difference in lagginess and choppiness. So I did drop quite a bit before, but I'm going to drop 2 points to show you that actually it doesn't really start to improve until you're dropping it to graphics setting 5. See, now you're doing about 44 frames per second, but it's a bit better, but there's still a noticeable lag. And you're doing about 42 frames per second. Again, not much is happening at the moment. I'm going to go to 6. Alright, so now we have 44 frames per second, 50 frames per second. It's significantly better, but again, we're not really doing much action now. When I start doing, I'm going to go ahead and queue for a raid, but you're going to see how it's going to be affecting performance significantly when there's more action happening. I'll also queue for PvP because it's also 40 man, so you can actually notice the lag. But even right now, it's still very choppy. So now we get to the sweet spot, which is graphics setting 5. Now I'm going to improve it a little bit here as I lower the quality of the shadows and the liquid details, but for just the moment I won't do that yet, because I'm going to show you how that made actually the biggest difference. See, if you look at this, you're doing 60 frames per second, it's a lot smoother. But let's wait for the queue to kick in, and we're going to actually see a far better result. It's definitely playable now. You're not going to notice significant graphics degradation, you're not going to notice significant lag. But I mean, ideally you're not getting the 13-inch MacBook Pro for raiding. You're getting it for questing. You're getting it for, you know, dailies. You're gonna play for a few hours. I mean, usually you're doing it because you're on the road or so on. Unless you of course put an external eGPU, but that's gonna get a little bit costier because it goes from $400 to $800. And that depends what video card you get. I'm quoting you on some of the ones that I found. There's a video actually I put. You can see the ones I found to be getting the best result. Now I do actually advise you getting a Radeon Vega, for example. For some reason Mac have better support and better drivers for the Mac interface than Nvidia. I think they no longer support their graphics cards for quite some time now. Of course, if you're in Windows and you're using Boot Camp, you can use the Windows drivers, but for all intents and purposes, we're talking about at the moment that you're actually using it for Mac OS. And again, I mean, you want a video card that will be compatible for both, Windows and Mac. Why would you want to have one that will only work with one? Anyways, right now we're doing 60 frames per second. This is 10 man, but it'll give you an idea. Here we go. So still a solid 60 frames per second, which is marvelous. Let's go where the action is. Alright, here we go. Still doing 60 frames per second. We're starting to see a little bit of action, and it's quite solid so far. See, look, I mean, there's definitely action. You're getting 60 frames per second. You can maybe go with graphics setting 6 and try and tweak it a little bit, reducing the shadows and so on, and dropping some other items. But honestly, there's no need, because I don't notice a big difference in graphics quality between setting 5 and 6. So you might as well stick with that. Now, if I remember correctly, the 2018 did just as good on that graphics setting. So at the moment there isn't any significant improvement there, but I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can queue us for a raid as well, and see if we can if we can still hold 60 frames per second even on a 40 man or 20 man or 25 man. So let's do that and see what result we're gonna get. Good thing I'm playing here as a healer, so it should go a lot faster in the queue. All right. So now I'm rocking 51 frames per second. So now we're actually start to see a little bit of a lag. So what I'm going to do actually before we start getting into any action is I'm going to play around a little bit with the effects. I'm going to drop the shadow quality to low and liquid to low. I think that should be enough. Yep, we're up back to 60 frames per second. There's already action, and it's not really dropping. 59, 60 frames per second, 58 per second. So that's ideally where you want to be. We're gonna play a little bit longer just to make sure it stays solid. 50 frames per second. This is with all the effects happening. Now what we can do is we can reduce a little bit the spell effect graphics. Let's see, what is it? Particle density, depth effect, lighting quality. I think maybe just drop the lighting quality to good. $60 frames per second, 58, 55 frames per second. So look, even with the heavy activity happening, you're dropping 47, 45, 50, 57 frames per second. Definitely playable even at trade at that setting. So If you want, you can definitely play. I think it's still quite decent if you want to raid, but maybe LFR again. I wouldn't do anything competitive while playing on the 13 inch again without an external GPU. But I mean, if you're a heavy gamer, honestly, you should be on a 15 inch. The only reason you're getting a 13 inch is because you want to be a little bit more mobile. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and jump to the next game. Now we're gonna try Diablo 3. Now with my experience, this doesn't really yield very good results. It's not really optimized, I think, for this laptop, or at least for any 13 inch with an Intel GPU. It may be a driver issue. Maybe if we run this in Windows format, it would go better, but you're gonna see how we have to drop it quite significantly before we are able to play in a smoother just a smoother play. You don't want to be dying for absolutely no reason. So right now that's the I think, let me just check, but what I did is I found the most optimal setting here. Pretty much I set everything to low. So texture quality low, shadow low, physics low, density low, but I kept the resolution high-ish, lower than the 2880. I put it 2560. If you go 2880, you're gonna see it's gonna be a little bit choppy. Again, without any action. See, if you notice, it's a bit slower response, and we haven't done any significant action yet. So if you see at the bottom right corner, that's the frames per second. So right now we're doing 33, 34 frames per second, and we haven't really done anything. So you don't really want to be here, especially if you're playing hardcore mode where you can actually die and lose everything. So let's drop it a little bit further.
Steal from me.
41 frames per second. 44, not really doing anything now. Let's drop it a little bit further. Let's go to 2048. All right, 55 frames per second. Now look, you can immediately notice the response time. See, it's a lot faster, it's a lot smoother. 68 frames per second, 46, 45, 57. So that's decent now. Let's see how well it reacts when there's some action happening. 47, 56 frames per second, 50 frames per second, 52 frames per second, 59. Pretty good. Oh boy. So look, with all this activity, is the lowest I've seen it is now 44 frames per second, 45 frames per second, 43 frames per second, which is quite decent. 46 frames per second, 50 frames per second. Very good. 51 frames per second with all this activity. Okay, so how did we get to this? I pretty much dropped it to 20 by 48 and by 1280, and pretty much everything is low here. You can see from the screen all the ones I've changed. So you can definitely play Diablo with the current settings. Again, you're not really here to do anything hardcore, but it's definitely playable, and it's not so bad. So let's go ahead and try another game. Now let's try StarCraft 2. All right.
Not enough minerals.
This purifier facility once converted warriors' personalities into AI, but it was shut down after complications with a Tal'Darim prisoner. His AI has infected many of our systems, and I will need your assistance to purge them.
Okay. So as you can see on the top left corner, we're doing 127 frames per second, which is great. Again, I've been playing around a little bit more here just to see how well it does and what's the best setting to get it at. And this is what it is. I'm gonna show you all the other settings, but I had to drop all the way to 1650 by 1050. I put pretty much low on everything, and I used metal. That's the best case scenario. You can do texture high, otherwise it gets really ugly. And portrait are 2D. Let's go 3D. 128 still. So that's quite decent. Now look what happens if I actually start changing to a little bit higher resolution. So let's go 2080. 2048 by 1280. Now we're at about 100, still 100 frames per second. Not bad. Okay. It is a little bit laggy, but it's still quite playable. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to see if I can actually get a little bit better resolution with the current settings. So let's go up to 2560. All right, now we're down to about 87 frames per second. It's kind of hard to see on the top left corner, but I'm gonna have to take my word for it for now. All right, so let's wait till there's some action, and then we're gonna see if it's still playable. All right, finally some action.
Banshee airstrike ready.
I must proceed to the next security terminal.
Here we go, finally some action. So doing about 79 frames per second. Let's just wait a little bit further. 90 frames per second, 100 frames per second, still actually quite good. I'm gonna go ahead and boost it even further. Let's go 2080. 2080, keeping everything else the same. Actually, it's still quite smooth. I'm doing about 90 frames per second, which is surprising actually. Yeah, dropping to 73, 76 frames per second. That's quite good actually. I didn't get that result before, but I think it's because the laptop is still cool and the fans didn't really start kicking in, because once you do that, then it starts really struggling. All right, so I'm going to change the graphic quality to high and keep it at the 2880 and see what we get. I can tell you right now, it's not happy. All right. Yeah, look how choppy that is. We're doing about 20 frames per second. And it's very, very, very choppy. So let us drop from high to medium and see if we can get it higher than 28 frames per second.
This is just a transport.
We're doing about 56, 53 frames per second. Not bad. Not great, not bad. Let's get more action. About 43 frames per second. It's still a bit choppy. I wouldn't do a competition on this. It's definitely not 4x4 player. So let's go to low again. Keep texture quality high. Yeah, now we're talking. Now we're doing about 93 frames per second with very little action, but it's definitely a lot player, a lot smoother. So now you actually can get some work done. Okay, so finally, the one that makes the biggest difference is in the graphics rather than the resolution. You can play a little bit further here, maybe change model to 3D, maybe terrain quality, maybe the effects get higher, but definitely playable at this setting, even at resolution 2080, which is surprising because originally I wasn't getting that good results. All right, now let's go ahead and try another game. Alright, let's try Heroes of the Storm first, and we'll try Hearthstone. Alright, I'm gonna play against AI because I don't feel like wasting my wasting a loss for no reason. Alright, let's take a look. Alright, it's a bit choppy as it is. Let's see if we can find the current frames per second. Alright, so now we're doing 46 frames per second, and the current setting is high at 1650 by 1050, which is very bad. So I'm going to drop it to medium, see if we can get a little bit better than 38 frames per second. Again, this was while there was no action. This is not a gate thing, by the way. Just the load is slow. You're doing about 46 frames per second, 53 frames per second. A little bit better, though it's still quite choppy, and you can see there's some tearing as well in the screen as you're moving around. So definitely still not ideal to play it, especially not when you're playing player versus player. So let's actually drop this to low, and now you can actually play without significant lag. But I'm gonna try and increase the resolution and keep the graphics quality low, just so we can get a little bit better. See, now you're doing, oh no, I don't think it's even gonna be worth it. Look at this, we're getting 68 frames per second, and it's quite low as it is right now. Now, the laptop did get hot, so that's one thing I want to point out. It was doing better before the fans kicked in and the CPU got hotter. That's always going to be a problem with the especially 13-inch, but I think 15-inch as well. See, now look, the frames per second jumped to 110 frames per second. It got a little bit cool. When it gets hotter, it's going to throttle down. I think it was around 43 frames per second, but let's take a look. 76, 92, 87 frames per second. Okay, it's still decent, but it's gonna drop a little bit further soon. Okay, so let us try, in this case, moving to 2048 by 1280, but keep the setting low. The graphics setting low. Alright, so we're getting about 87 frames per second, 100 frames per second, quite decent. 77 frames per second. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Now the fans start kicking in. So actually, before I go further, let's see what happens now to the CPU. By the way, I measured this earlier, and the temperature goes to about 43 Celsius before the fan starts kicking in. So now we're doing 100 frames per second. Definitely playable. The graphics is not horrible. '89, 105 frames per second. Okay, still good. Let us go even further. 2560, keeping the graphics settings low. Doing about 72 frames per second, not great. 79 frames per second. .74 frames per second, decent. Very decent actually. 76 frames per second with action. Okay, so it's at the border of playable because it's still, even though the frames per second seems high, it's still, I'm telling you, it's struggling. And the fan is kicking in and it's starting to drop now. There's some tearing if you notice. All right, so how would you play this? I would play around 2048 unless you want to drop the resolution further and maybe play around with the graphics quality and bring it to medium. Maybe lower the shader, texture quality, keep it to medium, post-processing medium, physics to off, terrain to low, effects low, and I think you're gonna get much better results now. So yeah, about 110 frames per second, and it's still a little bit of tearing. Okay, so is that the best you can do in this one? Look, I'm sure you can tweak it even further, but Diablo is really not optimized for on the Mac. See now, when I drop it to low, now you can notice it's significant better, and you're doing about 102, 103 frames per second. All right, so let's go ahead and try another game. So the last one for the Mac is Hearthstone. Now Hearthstone started running smoothly, I guess, from 2015, and this is while setting the highest graphic possible for it. So I mean, I don't expect any surprises there. It's gonna run just as smooth as the 2015 or 2016 13-inch. So, but we're gonna go ahead and test it. Yes. Options, resolution is the highest, quality is the highest. So that's the best we can do. Quite fast, no issues, no lag. Of course, it's not exactly the most intensive, high graphic demanding game, but it's fun. Yeah, it's quite fast, it's quite smooth, there's no tearing, there's no issue, there's no lag. Very good. At least you know you can play Hearthstone without any issues. Let's go, buddy. See, it's very fast. You're not gonna have any issues playing this game. Yeah, there's no issue. All right, so that should conclude the first part of gaming on the MacBook Pro 13-inch 2019. The part 2 is going to be the Windows side for games, which I will at least test a few, Overwatch, Destiny, and so on, and see if it's. I mean, it's supposed to be good, but it's not going to be much different than the 2018 model, at least not for Overwatch. But we're going to go ahead and test it. So check out part 2 of this.